The fluorescent lights above table 12 flickered with that tired, irregular pulse that matched my own exhaustion. I pressed my palm against the cool metal of the serving tray, steadying myself as another wave of dizziness rolled through my skull. 3 double shifts this week. My feet screamed inside the worn sneakers that had lost their cushioning months ago, and the constant ache in my lower back had become such a familiar companion that I'd stopped noticing it, except when I bent down, or stood up, or breathed. "Sophia, order up." Marco's voice cut through the kitchen window, sharp and impatient. I swallowed the metallic taste that had been coating my tongue all evening and pushed away from the wall. The diner smelled like grease, burnt coffee, and that peculiar mixture of cleaning solution and desperation that clung to places like this. Places where people like me worked ourselves into shadows, invisible to everyone except when they needed their coffee refilled or their check brought quickly. My reflection caught in the chrome napkin dispenser as I passed. Hollow eyes, hair escaping from a messy bun, the uniform that hung looser on my frame than it had 3 months ago. When did I start disappearing? When did eating become optional? Sleep become a luxury I couldn't afford? The dinner rush had finally died down to a handful of stragglers. Old Mr. Peterson nursed his decaf at the counter, the same spot he'd occupied every Thursday for the 5 years I'd worked here. A young couple shared a piece of apple pie in the corner booth, whispering and laughing in that bubble of intimacy that made my chest ache with something I didn't want to name. And then there was table 12. I'd noticed them when they walked in 20 minutes ago, noticed in the way you notice a storm rolling across the sky, or the moment before lightning strikes. 3 men in suits that probably cost more than my annual rent. But it was the one in the middle who made the air change. He moved like darkness given form, fluid, purposeful, dangerous. Even sitting, he commanded the space around him with an authority that needed no announcement. Dark hair, perfectly styled, a jawline that could cut glass, and eyes that seemed to catalog everything and everyone in the room within seconds. He couldn't have been older than 30, but he carried himself with the weight of someone who'd seen and done things that aged the soul beyond years. The 2 men flanking him never relaxed. Their eyes constantly swept the diner, hands resting at their sides in a way that suggested they were ready for violence at any moment. Security, protection. The kind that meant the man between them was either very important or very dangerous, probably both. I'd served enough questionable characters in this neighborhood to recognize predators. This man was an apex predator, and everyone else in the room was prey that hadn't realized they were being hunted. "You gonna stand there all night, or you gonna take their order?" Marco hissed, shoving 3 plates of meatloaf into my hands. I delivered the food to table 7 on autopilot, my body moving through the familiar choreography of service, while my mind kept drifting back to table 12. Why did men like that come to places like this? The diner was clean enough, but it was still a greasy spoon in a part of town that decent people avoided after dark. When I finally approached their table, my sneakers squeaking softly against the worn linoleum, the 2 guards' eyes locked onto me with predatory focus. But the man in the middle didn't look up immediately. He was reading something on his phone, one hand resting on the table. Long fingers, a watch that caught the light with the kind of gleam that spoke of wealth beyond my comprehension, and a ring on his right hand that looked heavy. Significant. "What can I get you, gentlemen?" My voice came out steadier than I felt. That's when he looked up. The impact of his gaze hit me like a physical force. Dark eyes, almost black in the diner's harsh lighting, assessed me with an intensity that made me feel simultaneously seen and dissected. For a moment, just a fragment of a second, something flickered across his features. Surprise? Recognition? But it vanished so quickly I thought I'd imagined it. Coffee. Black. His voice was smooth, controlled, with an accent I couldn't quite place. Italian, maybe, buried under years of American influence. "Same," the guard on his left said. "Water for me," the one on the right added, never taking his eyes off the front door. I scribbled the order on my pad, a nervous habit since 3 coffees and a water weren't exactly complicated. "Anything to eat?" "No." The dismissal in that single word was absolute. I should have walked away, should have turned on my aching feet and gotten their drinks and forgotten about table 12 entirely, but something made me linger, just for a heartbeat longer, and that's when I saw it. The man on the right shifted in his seat, and his jacket fell open. Nestled in a shoulder holster, unmistakable even in the dim light, was a gun. My breath caught. My eyes must have widened, because the man in the middle noticed, his gaze sharpened, following my line of sight, and something dangerous flashed across his features. "Is there a problem?" His voice dropped lower, quieter, which somehow made it more threatening. "No, sir, no problem." I backed up a step, my heart hammering against my ribs. "I'll get your drinks right away." I turned too quickly. My vision swam, the edges going dark and sparkly. I'd stood up too fast, moved too suddenly after hours of pushing my exhausted body beyond its limits. The room tilted. 3 steps. I made it 3 steps away from table 12 before my knees gave out. The floor rushed up to meet me, but it never came. Strong hands caught me, one arm sliding around my waist, another cradling my head before it could crack against the linoleum. The world spun in nauseating circles, sounds becoming muffled and distant. "Call Dr. Moretti, now." That voice again, sharp with command, close to my ear. I tried to open my eyes, to push away, to apologize for making a scene, but my body had finally reached its breaking point. Darkness pulled at me, sweet and insistent. The last thing I registered was a scent. Expensive cologne, something with notes of cedar and smoke, and underneath it, the clean smell of pressed cotton, warmth, strength. The sensation of being lifted, of being held against a chest that felt solid and real in a way that made my exhausted mind want to surrender completely, and then nothing. Consciousness returned in fragments. Soft sheets beneath me, far softer than the scratchy blanket on my apartment futon. The steady beep of a machine, the antiseptic smell of a hospital, but not the chaotic sounds of an ER. Wherever I was, it was quiet, private. I forced my eyes open, blinking against the soft light from a bedside lamp. The room was small but immaculate. Cream-colored walls, expensive-looking furniture, and equipment that beeped steadily, monitoring my vitals. Not a hospital room. At least, not a normal one. My hand felt heavy, warm. I turned my head, every muscle in my neck protesting the movement, and my breath stopped entirely. He was there. The man from table 12, sitting in a chair pulled close to the bed, still wearing that immaculate suit, and his hand. His hand was wrapped around mine, his thumb moving in absent, gentle circles across my knuckles. His eyes were closed, head tilted back against the chair, and in this unguarded moment, I could study him without that intense gaze pinning me in place. High cheekbones, a nose that had been broken at least once, a scar that cut through his left eyebrow, beautiful and brutal in equal measure. I must have made a sound, a gasp, or maybe just a change in my breathing, because his eyes snapped open instantly, that predatory alertness flooding back. "You're awake." He didn't move his hand from mine. If anything, his grip tightened slightly, possessive. "Don't try to sit up yet." "Where?" My voice cracked, throat dry as sand. "Where am I?" "Private medical facility. You collapsed." His thumb continued that maddening circle on my skin. "When was the last time you ate something?" The question caught me off guard. Yesterday? Maybe the day before. When did you last sleep? More than 3 hours? I couldn't remember. Time had become this blur of shifts and bills and trying to keep my head above water while the world kept pushing me under. "Who are you?" I finally asked the question that mattered. "Why am I here? Why are you?" I looked pointedly at our joined hands. He followed my gaze but didn't release me. Instead, something shifted in his expression. Something that might have been amusement, or might have been something darker. "My name is Dante Moretti." He said it like I should recognize it, like those 2 words should mean something. "And you're here because you saved my life." I stared at him, certain I'd heard wrong. What? The man sitting to my right, the one whose weapon you noticed, Dante's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. He wasn't my security, he was an assassin, planted in my detail 3 days ago. When you looked at his gun, when your eyes widened, I saw it. I realized something was wrong. The room felt too small suddenly, the air too thin. I don't understand. You don't need to understand. His voice carried that same absolute authority I'd heard in the diner. You saw something you weren't supposed to see, and your reaction saved my life. That makes you important. That makes you mine to protect. The possessive weight of that last word hung in the air between us like smoke. I need to go home, I whispered, trying to pull my hand from his. I have a shift tomorrow, and I can't afford. You don't work there anymore. Dante's grip remained firm but not painful. I've taken care of it, and your rent. And the medical bills I'm sure you've been avoiding. Horror flooded through me, hot and sharp. You can't just... I can do whatever I want, Sophia. The way he said my name, like he'd already memorized every syllable, like it belonged to him now, sent a shiver down my spine. And right now, I want you safe. That scene at the diner, the assassin, people saw. Word spreads in my world. Anyone who thinks you might be valuable to me, anyone who thinks you might know something, will come looking for you. Your world? I finally yanked my hand free, ignoring how the loss of his warmth made something in my chest protest. What world? Who are you? Dante Moretti stood, and the movement was so fluid, so controlled, that it reminded me again of a predator. He walked to the window, hands sliding into his pockets, and stared out at a view I couldn't see. I'm the man who's going to keep you alive, Sophia, whether you like it or not. The machine beside my bed beeped faster, monitoring my racing heart. In the reflection of the dark window, I could see his face, cold, beautiful, utterly unreadable. And I realized with growing dread that I hadn't fainted and woken up in a hospital. I'd fainted and woken up in a cage. The next morning arrived with pale sunlight filtering through curtains I didn't recognize, in a room that smelled of lavender and money. I'd spent the night in what Dante called the recovery suite, which was actually larger than my entire apartment, and decorated with the kind of understated elegance that screamed wealth louder than any amount of gold could. A woman in her 50s, with kind eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor, had brought me breakfast on a tray that probably cost more than my weekly paycheck. Mr. Moretti insists you eat everything, she'd said, setting down eggs, fresh fruit, toast, and juice that tasted like it had been squeezed from oranges picked that morning. He's very particular about your recovery. I wanted to argue. Wanted to throw the tray across the room and demand to leave. But my traitorous stomach growled at the sight of real food, and pride seemed like a luxury I couldn't afford when I was lightheaded with hunger. So I ate. Every bite tasted like surrender. Dr. Castellano, a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses who introduced himself as Dante's personal physician, examined me around noon. He asked questions about my eating habits, my work schedule, my stress levels. Each answer I gave made his frown deepen. Severe exhaustion, malnutrition, and the beginning stages of anemia, he pronounced, scribbling notes on an iPad. You're lucky Mr. Moretti was there to catch you. Another few weeks at that pace and you'd have ended up in a real hospital, or worse. I'm fine, I insisted, even though we both knew it was a lie. You will be fine, he corrected, with proper rest, nutrition, and significantly less stress. He paused, studying me with curiosity that felt invasive. Mr. Moretti has asked me to clear my schedule for the next week. You'll have daily checkups until your blood work improves. That's not necessary. It's not a request, Miss Torres. His voice softened with something that might have been sympathy. When Dante Moretti decides to protect someone, arguing is inadvisable. After he left, I sat in that pristine room, wearing borrowed silk pajamas that felt like sin against my skin, and tried to form a plan. I needed to leave. Needed to go back to my cramped apartment, my terrible job, my life, even if that life was slowly killing me. But when I tried the door, it opened to reveal a man in a dark suit standing in the hallway. Not overtly threatening, but his presence alone said everything I needed to know. Can I help you, Miss Torres? His voice was polite, professional. I need to leave. Mr. Moretti will be here this evening. You can discuss it with him then. Not a guard, I realized. A warden. I closed the door and pressed my forehead against the cool wood, fighting the panic rising in my chest. This was insane. People didn't just kidnap waitresses and keep them in luxury prisons because they accidentally noticed something at dinner. Except apparently, Dante Moretti did exactly that. He arrived as the sun began setting, painting the sky outside my window in shades of blood orange and deep purple. I heard him before I saw him, the subtle shift in the hallway's energy, the way the guard's posture changed from watchful to deferential. The door opened without a knock. Dante Moretti walked in like he owned not just the building, but the air itself. He'd changed from yesterday's suit into something equally expensive, but slightly less formal. Dark slacks, a black button-down with the sleeves rolled to his elbows, revealing forearms corded with lean muscle and marked with scars that told stories I probably didn't want to know. "How are you feeling?" He asked it like he actually cared, closing the door behind him with a soft click that sounded far too final, like a prisoner. I stayed by the window, keeping distance between us. "You can't keep me here." "I can, and I will." He moved to the small sitting area, settling into an armchair with that same fluid grace. "Until I'm certain you're safe." "Safe from what?" "I don't know anything. I saw a gun. So what? Lots of people carry guns." "Not in my presence. Not unless I've authorized it." His eyes tracked every micro-expression on my face. "The man you saw, the assassin. He was sent by the Calabrese family. They've been trying to eliminate me for 6 months. Your reaction exposed him before he could act. The names meant nothing to me, but the weight behind them was unmistakable. Then thank you for the expensive hospital stay. But I'd like to go home now." "No." The single word landed like a gavel. No explanation, no apology. Just absolute refusal. "You can't just decide. I already have." Dante leaned forward, elbows on his knees, and the movement brought him into the dying sunlight. It caught the sharp planes of his face, making him look carved from marble and shadow. "The Calabrese family doesn't know who you are yet, but they will. They'll find out a waitress noticed something wrong. They'll wonder what else you saw, what you might tell the police, whether you're valuable to me. But I'm not valuable to you. I'm nobody." Something flashed in his eyes, something that made my pulse skip. "That's where you're wrong, Sophia." The way he said my name again, rolling the syllables like a promise or a threat, made heat crawl up my neck. "I don't understand any of this." I wrapped my arms around myself, suddenly cold despite the room's perfect temperature. "I just wanted to work my shift and go home. I didn't ask for any of this. No one asks for their life to change." He stood, and I forced myself not to back away as he crossed the room to me. He moved like smoke, like danger, like something inevitable. "But it changes anyway, and now your life is connected to mine whether you want it to be or not." He stopped just close enough that I could smell that cedar and smoke scent again, could feel the heat radiating from his body. Close enough to be threatening, but not quite touching. My heart hammered so loud I was certain he could hear it. "What do you want from me?" The question came out barely above a whisper. Dante's hand lifted, and I flinched involuntarily. But he didn't touch me, just reached past me to adjust the curtain, blocking the last rays of sunset and plunging us into the room's softer lamplight. "I want you safe. I want you healthy. I want you to stop working yourself to death in that diner." His voice dropped lower, intimate. "And I want you to trust that I won't let anything happen to you." "Trust you? I don't even know you." "You will." It wasn't a prediction. It was a certainty. "You're going to stay here, in my home, under my protection, until the threat is neutralized." "Your home?" I looked around the luxurious suite with new understanding. "This is your house? One of them." He stepped back, giving me space to breathe again. "You'll have everything you need. Clothes, food, entertainment. Dr. Castellano will continue monitoring your health. Maria, the woman who brought your breakfast, will help you with anything you require. Except my freedom." His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Freedom is relative, Sophia. You were free in that diner. Free in your apartment with the broken heat and the landlord who charges too much for too little. Free to work yourself into an early grave while the world ignored you." He paused, letting that sink in. "Here, you're constrained but cared for. Which version of freedom would you prefer? The question felt like a trap, because he wasn't entirely wrong. The life I'd been living wasn't really living at all. It was surviving, barely, one crisis away from complete collapse, but at least it had been mine. I need air, I said suddenly, the walls feeling like they were closing in. I need to get out of this room. Dante studied me for a long moment, then nodded. Come with me. He led me through hallways that belonged in a museum. Marble floors, art that was probably priceless, lighting that cast everything in warm, golden tones. We passed other guards, men who nodded respectfully at Dante, and looked through me like I was a ghost. We emerged onto a terrace that overlooked a manicured garden, the city skyline glittering in the distance. The night air was cool against my flushed skin, carrying the scent of jasmine and earth. Better? Dante stood beside me at the railing, close but not touching. No. I gripped the stone balustrade until my knuckles went white. Nothing about this is better. You've kidnapped me. Protected you, he corrected. And you're acting like you have the right to control my entire life. I have the power to control it. The right is irrelevant. The casual arrogance of that statement should have made me furious. Instead, it just exhausted me. I felt the weight of the past 24 hours crash down, the bizarre reality of my situation settling into my bones. Why me? I asked quietly, staring at the distant lights. You said I saved your life. Fine. Thank you seems like it would have sufficed. Why go to all this trouble? Silence stretched between us, filled only by the sound of night insects and distant traffic. When Dante finally spoke, his voice carried a strange quality I couldn't identify. When you looked at me in the diner for just a moment before you saw the gun, do you know what I saw in your eyes? I shook my head. Nothing. No recognition, no fear, no calculation. You looked at me like I was just another customer. He turned to face me fully, and the intensity in his gaze made my breath catch. Do you know how rare that is? How few people in this world look at me and see just a man? I didn't know who you were. Exactly. His lips curved in something that wasn't quite a smile. Everyone in my world wants something from me. Power, money, protection, death. Everyone looks at me and sees Dante Moretti, head of the Moretti family, the man who controls half the city's underground. But you? You just saw a customer who needed coffee. And that's worth imprisoning me? That's worth protecting you. He reached out slowly, telegraphing the movement, and tucked a strand of hair behind my ear. His fingers barely grazed my skin, but the touch sent electricity racing down my spine. The moment you fainted in my arms, Sophia, you became mine to care for. That's how my world works. You saved me, intentionally or not. So now I owe you a debt that can only be repaid by ensuring your safety. I don't want a debt. I want my life back. Your life was killing you. His hand dropped to his side, but he didn't step away. Your life was working 3 jobs to afford a 1-room apartment with mold in the bathroom and a landlord who threatens eviction every month. Your life was skipping meals and sleep and slowly erasing yourself from existence. The accuracy of his words hit like a slap. How do you... I know everything about you, Sophia Marie Torres, 26 years old, orphaned at 18, no family, no close friends. You've been invisible for so long you've started to believe that's all you deserve to be. His voice dropped to barely above a whisper. But I see you, and I'm not going to let you disappear. Tears burned behind my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. You don't get to decide that. I already have. We stood there on that terrace, the cool night air swirling around us. And I realized the terrifying truth. Dante Moretti wasn't just protecting me from external threats, he was protecting me from myself, from the slow suicide of my previous existence. And I didn't know if I should thank him or hate him for it. A phone buzzed, breaking the moment. Dante pulled a device from his pocket, glanced at the screen, and his expression hardened into something cold and lethal. What is it? I asked before I could stop myself. The Calabresi family just put a price on your head. He looked at me, and there was something almost apologetic in his eyes. $200,000 for information leading to the waitress who exposed their assassin. The world tilted again, but this time I was ready for it. I gripped the railing harder and forced myself to breathe through the panic. So what happens now? Dante's hand covered mine on the stone, warm and steady and terrifying in its certainty. Now I make it very clear that anyone who touches you will answer to me. And in my world, Sophia, that's a death sentence they won't survive. The promise in his voice should have reassured me. Instead, it felt like another chain snapping into place, binding me to this beautiful, dangerous man, whether I wanted it or not. 3 days passed in a strange suspension of reality, days where I existed in Dante's world without being part of it, a ghost haunting marble hallways and silk sheets, eating food prepared by invisible hands, watching the guards change shifts outside my door with military precision. Maria brought me clothes that actually fit, designer labels I'd only seen in magazine advertisements worn by women who looked nothing like me. She chatted while organizing the walk-in closet that had mysteriously appeared attached to my suite, talking about weather and recipes and her grandchildren, carefully avoiding any mention of why I was here or who was keeping me. Dr. Castellano came daily, checking vitals and nodding with satisfaction as my blood work slowly improved. "Color's returning to your face," he'd said that morning. "Keep eating like this, and you'll be healthy in no time, healthy." As if physical wellness could compensate for the cage, no matter how gilded, Dante himself appeared sporadically. Late evenings mostly, when he'd knock once and enter without waiting for permission. He never stayed long, just checked on me with that intense gaze that felt like being X-rayed, asked if I needed anything, and left before I could formulate the right questions. But I felt his presence everywhere. In the books that appeared on the nightstand, all titles I'd mentioned loving years ago. In the specific brand of tea that showed up at breakfast, the one my mother used to make, in the classical music that played softly through hidden speakers, pieces I'd hummed while working at the diner without realizing anyone was listening. He was learning me, studying me, and that terrified me more than any threat from mysterious crime families. On the 4th morning, I woke to voices outside my door. Sharp, urgent, male. I pressed my ear against the wood, heart racing. Not safe here anymore. The Calabresi family knows the general location. They're circling closer. That was Marco, one of Dante's senior guards. We need to move her to the compound upstate. No. Dante's voice, cold and absolute. I'm not hiding her away like she's guilty of something. She stays where I can see her. Boss, with all respect. I said no, Marco. Double the perimeter security. I want men on every entrance, cameras monitoring every angle, and background checks on anyone who comes within a mile of this property. A pause. And bring in Luca. It's time we send a message to the Calabresi family about what happens when they threaten what's mine. What's mine? I stepped back from the door, wrapping my arms around myself. The possessiveness in those words should have made me angry. Instead, it made something low in my stomach tighten with an emotion I didn't want to examine. An hour later, Maria knocked and entered with her usual bright smile. "Mr. Moretti would like you to join him for lunch. Nothing formal, just the two of you in the garden." "I can refuse, right?" Her smile faltered slightly. "You can. But he's been concerned. He'd appreciate seeing you eat a proper meal." Concerned. As if he hadn't orchestrated my entire imprisonment. But curiosity won over defiance. I let Maria help me into a soft blue sundress that made me look less like a prisoner and more like a guest, then followed her through the labyrinth of hallways to French doors that opened onto the garden I'd only glimpsed from the terrace. Dante sat at a wrought iron table beneath an pergola, heavy with climbing roses. He'd shed his jacket, working in just dark slacks and a white shirt with the sleeves rolled up, papers spread across the table beside an untouched plate of food. He looked up when I approached, and something in his expression shifted. Softened, maybe. Though calling anything about Dante Moretti soft seemed wrong. "Sophia." He stood immediately, pulling out a chair for me with an old-world courtesy that felt at odds with everything else about him. "Thank you for joining me. Did I have a choice?" I sat, hyper-aware of how close he was as he pushed the chair in. "Always." He returned to his own seat, those dark eyes never leaving my face. "You always have choices here. They just might not be the ones you want." A woman I didn't recognize brought out covered dishes, pasta with fresh vegetables, grilled chicken, salad that looked like it had been harvested that morning. My stomach growled audibly, betraying me. Dante's lips quirked. Please, eat. We sat in strange silence while I filled my plate, hyper-conscious of his gaze tracking every movement. The food tasted incredible, each bite a reminder of how long I'd survived on ramen and whatever expired items Marco let me take from the diner. You're staring, I finally said, unable to take the intensity anymore. I'm observing. There's a difference. Observing what? The way color comes back to your face when you eat. The way you've stopped looking at the exits every few seconds, calculating escape routes. He leaned back in his chair, wine glass dangling from long fingers. The way you're starting to relax, even if you don't want to admit it. I'm not relaxing. I'm adapting. There's a difference. He smiled then, a real smile that transformed his face from coldly beautiful to something dangerously compelling. Touché. I took a sip of water, trying to ignore the flutter in my chest. Can I ask you something? Always. Why are you really doing this, and don't give me that debt repayment excuse? Men like you don't upend their lives over a waitress noticing something at dinner. Dante set down his wine glass, his expression becoming unreadable again. Men like me? Dangerous men. Powerful men. Men who have people killed with a phone call and think nothing of it. Is that what you think I am? Isn't it? He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he stood and walked to the roses, reaching out to touch a blood-red bloom with surprising gentleness. When he spoke, his voice carried a weight that made my breath catch. My father built an empire on fear and violence. He taught me that power was the only thing worth having, that weakness was a disease that needed to be cut out before it spread. He turned back to face me, and there was something almost vulnerable in his expression. I was 8 years old the first time I watched him kill a man. 12, when he made me pull the trigger myself. Horror crawled up my spine. Dante, I tell you this because you asked for truth, Sophia. And the truth is, yes, I'm dangerous. Yes, I've done things that would make you run screaming if you knew the details, but I'm also tired. He moved back toward the table, each step deliberate. I'm tired of a world where everyone wants something from me, where every interaction is a negotiation or a threat, where the only thing I can trust is power. He stopped in front of my chair, looking down at me with an intensity that stole my breath, and then you collapsed in my arms. This woman who'd worked herself nearly to death just to survive, who looked at me like I was just another person, who saved my life without even knowing it. His hand lifted, fingers ghosting along my jawline without quite touching. You're real, Sophia. In a world of masks and manipulation, you're unflinchingly, impossibly real, and I'm selfish enough to want to keep that close. My heart hammered against my ribs. That's not fair. No, he agreed, his thumb finally making contact with my skin, tracing the curve of my cheek. It's not. But nothing about my world is fair. And right now, keeping you safe, keeping you here, is the only thing that makes sense. I should have pulled away. Should have told him that pretty words didn't excuse imprisonment, that vulnerability didn't justify control. But his touch was so gentle, so at odds with everything I knew about him, that I found myself frozen. What if I asked you to let me go? I whispered. I'd say no. His honesty was brutal, but I'd also ask you where you'd go, Sophia. Back to the diner that doesn't exist anymore? The apartment you couldn't afford? The life that was slowly erasing you? At least it was my life. Was it? Or were you just existing, waiting for something to change because you were too exhausted to change it yourself? The accusation hit too close to home. I stood abruptly, needing distance, needing air. Dante let me go, watching as I paced toward the garden's edge. You act like you saved me, I said, staring at the high walls that surrounded this beautiful prison. But maybe I didn't need saving. Maybe I just needed time, or a break, or you needed someone to see you. His voice came from right behind me, close enough that I could feel his warmth. You needed someone to care whether you disappeared. And I do, Sophia, more than I should. More than is probably safe for either of us. I turned to face him, and the look in his eyes made my knees weak. There was hunger there, yes, but also something that looked almost like longing. This is insane, I breathed. Probably. He stepped closer, crowding me against the garden wall, his hands coming to rest on either side of my head. Not touching, but trapping. But I've built my life on calculated risks and strategic moves. You, Sophia Torres, are neither calculated nor strategic. You're chaos and instinct, and the first thing in 10 years that's made me feel something other than cold purpose. Dante, tell me you don't feel it too. His voice dropped to barely above a whisper, his face inches from mine. Tell me you haven't noticed the way the air changes when we're in the same room. Tell me you don't lie awake at night thinking about this. I couldn't. Because he was right. Despite everything, the imprisonment, the danger, the absolute insanity of this situation, there was something between us, something electric and terrifying that had nothing to do with logic or reason. This is Stockholm Syndrome, I tried weakly. Is it? Or is it two people who've been alone too long finally seeing each other? His lips were so close now, his breath warm against my skin. One more inch and we'd cross a line that couldn't be uncrossed. The sound of footsteps made us both freeze. Marco appeared at the garden entrance, his expression carefully neutral despite what he'd almost walked in on. Boss, we have a situation. Dante didn't move immediately. His eyes stayed locked on mine, something like regret flickering in their depths. Then he stepped back, the cold mask sliding into place so quickly I almost wondered if I'd imagined the moment before. What kind of situation? His voice was all business now. The Calabresi family. They've made a move. Not on us. On the Santoro operation on the south side. 8 men dead. Their shipment stolen. It's a declaration of war. Dante's jaw tightened. Gather the family heads. Conference room in 20 minutes. He glanced back at me. Marco will escort you back to your suite. I can find my own way. Marco will escort you. No room for argument. And Sophia? Don't leave your room until I come get you. Things are about to get dangerous, and I need to know you're safe. He walked away before I could respond, already pulling out his phone and barking orders. Marco approached with that professional courtesy that somehow made the imprisonment worse. Miss Torres? I followed him back through the house, my mind spinning. War. The Calabresi family was declaring war, and I was somehow caught in the middle of it. But worse, far worse, was the phantom sensation of Dante's breath against my lips, the memory of how badly I'd wanted to close that final distance. Maria was waiting in my suite with tea and sympathy in her eyes. Try not to worry, she said softly. Mr. Moretti has never lost a war. He won't start now. But as I sat in that luxurious cage, listening to the house come alive with urgent movement and low voices, I realized the war I should be worried about wasn't the one with the Calabresi family. It was the one raging inside me, between self-preservation and the terrifying pull toward a man who'd trapped me in silk and called it salvation. The house transformed overnight. Where there had been quiet luxury, now there was controlled chaos. Men in dark suits moving with purpose through hallways, phones ringing at all hours, the low murmur of voices discussing strategy and retribution. I caught fragments when guards changed outside my door, shipments, territories, blood debts that needed settling. I was a ghost again, but this time by design. Maria brought my meals with tight smiles and worried eyes. Dr. Castellano's visits became perfunctory, quick vital checks and distracted nods. Even the guards seemed more focused on threats beyond the walls than the woman trapped within them. Dante disappeared entirely. 2 days passed without seeing him. 2 days where I paced my gilded cage and tried not to think about that moment in the garden, the way his breath had felt against my skin, the hunger in his eyes that had matched something dark and urgent in my own chest. On the 3rd night, I woke to voices, not outside my door, but somewhere deeper in the house. Shouting. The sharp crack of something breaking. My heart hammered as I slipped from bed, pressing my ear against the door. Nothing. I shouldn't have opened it, shouldn't have stepped into the darkened hallway wearing nothing but silk pajamas and curiosity. But the guard who was usually posted had vanished, and the pull toward those distant voices was stronger than self-preservation. The house felt different at night, shadows stretching longer, the artwork on the walls seeming to watch my passage. I followed the sound to a wing I'd never explored, down a staircase that led to heavy wooden doors. Light spilled from underneath. Voices rose and fell in cadences that spoke of argument, of barely controlled violence. I shouldn't have pushed the door open, shouldn't have looked, but I did. The room was some kind of office, dark wood paneling, expensive furniture, and walls lined with screens showing security feeds. A dozen men stood in various positions, all focused on the head of the table where Dante sat, still wearing the suit from however many hours ago, sleeves rolled up and tie discarded. He looked exhausted, dangerous, beautiful in the way natural disasters were beautiful, terrible and compelling and utterly devastating. "Don't care what it costs," he was saying, voice like gravel and smoke. "The Calabrese family drew first blood. We respond with overwhelming force. I want every operation they have in this city shut down by the end of the week, their suppliers cut off, their distribution networks destroyed, their protection money stopped." "Boss," one of the men interrupted carefully, "that's going to mean civilian casualties. Innocent people caught in the crossfire." Dante's expression didn't change. "Then make sure our people are careful. But I will not show weakness because they've decided to escalate. The Santoro family was under our protection, and 8 of their men are dead because the Calabrese thought they could move against us without consequences." "What about the girl?" Another voice, one I didn't recognize. The waitress. "Word on the street is that the Calabrese family thinks she's your weakness. That you've gone soft over some nobody who—" The sound of Dante's fist hitting the table was like a gunshot. Every man in the room froze. "Her name," Dante said with lethal quiet, "is Sophia. And anyone who refers to her as anything less than a person under my personal protection will find themselves answering to me directly. Is that understood?" Murmured agreements rippled through the room. "The Calabrese family thinks she's leverage against me. Let them think it. Let them focus their attention on finding her while we dismantle everything they've built." He stood, and even exhausted, even wearing violence like a second skin, his authority was absolute. "But Marco, I want triple security on the house. No one gets within 2 blocks without our people knowing about it. She doesn't leave her suite, she doesn't go near windows, and if anyone manages to get close to her, heads will roll. Literally." That's when he saw me. His gaze snapped to the door I'd foolishly opened, and every other man in the room turned to follow. The weight of their collective attention was suffocating. Curiosity, assessment, speculation about the woman who'd somehow captured Dante Moretti's obsessive protection. "Out," Dante ordered, eyes never leaving mine. "All of you. Now." The room emptied with impressive speed. Marco was the last to leave, shooting me a look that might have been warning or sympathy before closing the door behind him. Silence stretched between us, heavy and charged. "You should be in your room." Dante's voice was carefully controlled, but I could hear the edge underneath, anger or fear or something more complicated. I heard shouting. I thought, "You thought what, Sophia? That you could help? That wandering around my house in the middle of the night while there's a war happening was somehow a good idea?" He moved around the desk, each step deliberate. "Do you have any concept of how many people would pay a fortune to get their hands on you right now? I'm not helpless. No, you're reckless. There's a difference." He stopped a few feet away, close enough that I could see the exhaustion etched into his features, the shadow of stubble darkening his jaw. What if it hadn't been my men in that hallway? What if the Calabrese family had managed to breach security? What if— But they didn't. I lifted my chin, refusing to be cowed. And maybe I'm tired of being locked away like some damsel who needs constant saving. Maybe I'm tired of being treated like property instead of a person. Something flashed in his eyes, something dark and possessive that made my breath catch. "Is that what you think you are to me, property? What else would you call it? You control where I go, what I do, who I see. You make decisions about my life without consulting me. You stand in rooms with dangerous men and talk about protecting me like I'm an asset to be defended instead of a human being with agency." I didn't see him move. One moment he was feet away, the next his hands cupped my face, tilting my head back, his body crowding mine against the closed door. "You want to know what you are to me?" His voice was rough, strained. "You're the first breath after drowning. You're every moment of peace I've had in 10 years. You're the reason I can't sleep because I'm too busy making sure you're safe. You're the only thing in this world that's mine, not because I took it or inherited it or killed for it, but because fate put you in my arms when you fell. His thumb traced my lower lip, and I trembled despite myself. You're not property, Sophia. You're the one thing I can't afford to lose. And that terrifies me more than any war, any enemy, any threat this world can throw at me. Dante, I didn't know what I was asking for. Space? Understanding? Or maybe for him to close that final distance and end this torturous tension between us. I know I'm selfish. His forehead dropped to rest against mine, eyes closing. I know keeping you here, keeping you close, is as much for me as it is for your safety. But I've spent my entire life being what other people needed me to be. Ruthless, cold, untouchable. With you, I get to be something else. Something almost human. You are human. My hands had somehow found their way to his chest, feeling the rapid beat of his heart beneath expensive fabric. Flawed and complicated and occasionally infuriating, but human. He laughed, a rough sound without humor. Careful, Sophia. You're starting to sound like you care. Maybe I do. The admission slipped out before I could stop it. Maybe that's what makes this so impossible. I should hate you for trapping me here, for making decisions about my life, for all of it. But instead, I couldn't finish. Couldn't say the words that would make this real. His eyes opened, so close that I could see flecks of gold in their dark depths. Instead, you what? Instead, I understand why you did it. The confession felt like surrender. My life before this, it wasn't living. It was just existing. Waiting for something to change while being too exhausted to change it myself. You were right about that. That doesn't make what I did okay. No, I agreed. But it doesn't make you the monster you think you are either. Something shifted in his expression. Vulnerability, hope, hunger, all tangled together. His thumb continued its maddening trace across my lip, and I found myself leaning into the touch, despite every rational thought screaming that this was madness. I should let you go back to your room, he murmured, but his hands didn't move. It's late, and you need rest. And standing this close to you is testing every ounce of control I have left. What if I don't want you to be controlled? The words hung between us, dangerous and full of promise. Dante's grip on my face tightened fractionally, his breath coming faster. Sophia, if I kiss you right now, if I give in to what I've been wanting since that first moment in the diner, there's no going back. You understand that? You'll be mine in every way that matters. And I don't share. Ever. The possessiveness should have scared me. Instead, it sent heat pooling low in my stomach. Maybe I don't want to go back. I rose onto my toes, closing the distance between us by inches. Maybe I'm tired of being careful and practical and safe. Maybe I want to make one completely irrational decision. He kissed me before I could finish, and it was like falling and flying simultaneously. His lips claimed mine with a hunger that stole my breath, one hand tangling in my hair while the other pulled me flush against him. I gasped against his mouth, and he took advantage, deepening the kiss until I forgot where I ended and he began. This wasn't gentle, wasn't careful. This was desperation and desire, and days of tension finally breaking like a dam. My hands fisted in his shirt, pulling him closer, needing more of something I couldn't name. Dante groaned against my lips, the sound vibrating through both of us, and suddenly we were moving. He walked me backward until my spine hit the desk, lifted me onto it without breaking the kiss, positioned himself between my thighs in a way that made coherent thought impossible. Tell me to stop, he murmured against my lips, his hands roaming my sides, my back, everywhere and not enough. Tell me this is wrong, that you don't want this. I can't. I pulled him back to me, kissing him with equal fervor. I can't because I do want this, want you. Even though it's insane and complicated and probably the worst decision I've ever made, he silenced me with another searing kiss, his hands sliding beneath the silk of my pajama top, warm palms against bare skin. I arched into the touch, a sound escaping my throat that was half gasp, half plea. Mine. He breathed against my neck, lips tracing fire down my throat. Say it, Sophia. Say you're mine. I should have protested. Should have argued that people didn't belong to other people. That this possessiveness was unhealthy. That we were moving too fast. But his mouth was doing incredible things to my pulse point, and his hands were mapping my body like he was memorizing every curve. And the rational part of my brain had abandoned ship entirely. Yours, I gasped. I'm yours. The word seemed to break something in him. He captured my mouth again, the kiss turning almost savage, and I met him with equal intensity, my legs wrapped around his waist, pulling him impossibly closer, and he groaned my name like a prayer or a curse. A sharp knock on the door made us both freeze. Boss, we have a situation. Marco's voice, apologetic but urgent. The Calabrese family just hit one of our warehouses on the east side. 3 men down, merchandise stolen, reality crashed back in waves. Dante rested his forehead against mine, both of us breathing hard, his hands still on my skin. I have to deal with this, he said quietly, regret heavy in his voice. I know. He pulled back enough to look at me, and what I saw in his eyes made my heart stutter. Possession, yes, but also something deeper. Something that looked almost like love. Go back to your room. Lock the door. Don't open it for anyone but Maria or me. He helped me down from the desk, straightening my disheveled pajamas with gentle hands. This isn't over, Sophia. Not even close. Promise? A fierce smile crossed his features. I never break my promises. Especially not to you. He kissed me one more time, softer, sweeter, full of unspoken promises, then stepped away and opened the door. Marco stood outside, carefully not looking at either of us. Take her back to her suite. Personal escort. And Marco? Dante's voice hardened. If anything happens to her while I'm gone, you don't come back. Understood, boss. I followed Marco through silent hallways, my lips still tingling, my body still humming with unfulfilled desire. At my door, he paused. He's not a good man, Miss Torres, but he's trying to be better. For you. Marco's expression was unreadable. That counts for something in our world. There. Before I could respond, he was gone, leaving me alone with the taste of Dante still on my lips and the terrifying realization that I'd just crossed a line I could never uncross. I was falling for a man who killed people with phone calls, who controlled an empire built on violence and fear. And the most terrifying part, I didn't want to stop falling. The war intensified over the next week like a storm that had been brewing on the horizon finally making landfall. I heard it in fragments, whispered conversations between guards, Maria's increasingly worried glances, the way Dante's visits became shorter, more distracted, shadows deepening under his eyes. He came to me every night, though, no matter how late, no matter how exhausted. Sometimes we just sat in silence, my head on his shoulder while he traced idle patterns on my arm. Sometimes we talked about everything except the violence happening beyond these walls. And sometimes, most nights, we kissed with a desperate hunger that left us both breathless and wanting more than we allowed ourselves to take. Soon, he'd promise against my lips, when this is over, when you're truly safe, I'll give you everything, but not while there's still danger, not while I can't protect you properly. I understood, even as frustration built beneath my skin. He was compartmentalizing, keeping me separate from the darkness of his world, trying to preserve something pure in the midst of chaos. But purity was an illusion. I was already stained by association, already complicit in this life whether I wanted to be or not. On the 8th day, everything changed. I woke to silence, the wrong kind of silence. The house felt empty in a way that set my nerves on edge. No footsteps in the hallway, no low murmur of voices, no sense of the controlled activity that had become familiar. Maria didn't come with breakfast. Dr. Castellano didn't appear for my checkup. Even the guard outside my door was gone. Something was very, very wrong. I dressed quickly in jeans and a sweater, practical clothes for whatever was coming, and tried the door. Unlocked. The hallway stretched empty in both directions, morning sunlight streaming through windows that suddenly felt too exposed. Hello? My voice echoed unanswered. I moved through the house cautiously, every instinct screaming danger. The main floor was deserted, dishes still on the dining table from breakfast that had been interrupted. A phone lay abandoned on the marble floor. Screen cracked. Then I heard it. A sound from the garden. Voices. One I recognized. I ran. The garden doors stood open, and the scene that greeted me stopped my heart. Dante knelt in the grass, hands bound behind his back, blood running from a cut above his eye. 3 men in dark suits surrounded him, guns drawn. And standing over him with a smile that made my blood run cold was a man I'd never seen before, older, silver-haired, with eyes like chips of ice. Ah, there she is. The silver-haired man's smile widened. The infamous Sofia Torres, the waitress who brought down an empire. "Run!" Dante said through gritted teeth, not looking at me. "Sofia, run!" One of the guards hit him in the ribs, and I gasped as Dante doubled over. "Don't." The word came out stronger than I felt. "Don't touch him." Or what? The older man laughed. "You'll save him again? I'm Antonio Calabrese, my dear, and you've caused me considerable trouble." The name hit like ice water. The enemy, the man who'd declared war, who'd put a price on my head, who'd been hunting me for weeks. "I didn't mean to cause trouble," I said carefully, moving slowly into the garden. "I was just working. I didn't know. Didn't know you'd expose our assassin. Didn't know you'd save the life of our greatest enemy." Antonio circled Dante like a predator. "Or perhaps you didn't know that Dante Moretti would become so obsessed with protecting you that he'd make mistakes, that he'd pull men from critical positions to guard a worthless waitress, that he'd expose weaknesses we've spent years trying to find." "She has nothing to do with this," Dante growled. "Your fight is with me, Antonio. Let her go." "Let her go." Antonio laughed again, the sound devoid of humor. "She's the only reason you're still alive, Dante. I could put a bullet in your head right now, but where's the fun in that? No, I think I'll take something from you first. Make you watch as I destroy the one thing you actually care about." He pulled a gun from his jacket, pointing it casually at me. Everything slowed down. I saw Dante struggle against his bonds, saw murder in his eyes as he lunged forward despite the guns trained on him. Saw Antonio's finger tighten on the trigger, and I realized with perfect clarity that I wasn't ready to die. Not now. Not when I'd finally found something. Someone worth living for. "Wait!" The word exploded from me. "Wait. Please. I'll go with you. I'll be your leverage, your prisoner. Whatever you want. Just don't kill him. Please." Antonio paused, interest flickering in those cold eyes. How touching. The mouse offering herself to save the lion. "Sofia?" "No," Dante's voice was raw, desperate. "Don't you dare. It's my choice." I met his eyes across the garden, trying to memorize every detail of his face. "You've been making decisions for me since we met. Let me make this one." How noble. Antonio lowered the gun slightly. "But I'm afraid it's not that simple. You see, killing Dante quickly would be mercy, but making him live knowing he failed to protect you, watching you suffer because of his weakness, that's poetry." The gun swung back toward me and I closed my eyes. The gunshot was deafening, but I didn't feel anything. No pain, no impact. I opened my eyes to chaos. Antonio stumbling backward, clutching his shoulder where blood bloomed across his expensive suit. Men in dark clothes poured from every entrance to the garden, moving with military precision. And standing at the garden gate, still holding the smoking gun, was Marco. "Sorry we're late, boss." He moved forward, flanking guards securing the Calabrese men with brutal efficiency. Had to make sure we got all of them before moving in. It had been a trap. The entire thing, a trap. Dante was on his feet immediately, bonds apparently not as secure as they'd appeared. He crossed the garden in 3 strides and pulled me into his arms so hard it drove the breath from my lungs. "You stupid, brave, impossible woman," he muttered against my hair, hands running over me as if checking for injuries. "You were supposed to stay in your room. You were supposed to be safe. The house was empty. By design. We knew they'd make a move, knew they'd use me to draw you out." He pulled back enough to look at me, and his eyes were wild. "But I never thought you'd actually offer yourself. Never thought you'd be willing to die for me." You were willing to die for me, I pointed out shakily. That's different. How? How is it different? He didn't answer, just kissed me with a desperation that spoke of fear and relief and possession all tangled together. I kissed him back with equal fervor, not caring about the audience, not caring about anything except the fact that we were both alive. When we finally broke apart, Antonio was on his knees, surrounded by guards. Dante turned to face him, one arm still wrapped protectively around my waist. You made a mistake, Antonio. Dante's voice was cold, lethal. You came into my home. You threatened what's mine, and for that, there's only one consequence. Wait. Antonio's confidence had evaporated, replaced by naked fear. We can negotiate. Find a compromise. The time for negotiation ended when you pointed a gun at her. Dante nodded to Marco. Make it clean, and send what's left back to his family as a message. Anyone who touches Sofia Torres answers to me personally. Guards dragged Antonio away, his protests fading into the distance. I should have been horrified, should have been disgusted by the casual order of execution, by the violence underlying every word. But all I felt was relief and something darker, satisfaction that the man who'd tried to hurt us would never threaten anyone again. Am I a terrible person? I asked quietly, for not feeling bad about what's going to happen to him. Dante turned me to face him fully, hands cupping my face with infinite gentleness. You're human. You're allowed to want the people who threaten you to face consequences. Is it over? The war? It will be. The Calabrese family just lost their head. The other families will fall in line once they understand the price of defying me. His thumb traced my cheekbone. And then, Sofia Torres, we need to have a very serious conversation about you offering to sacrifice yourself. You would have done the same, yes, and it would have destroyed you. Don't you understand that? His voice cracked slightly. Losing you would end me in ways that no bullet or blade ever could. You've become essential, Sofia. You're not just someone I'm protecting anymore. You're everything. The weight of those words settled over us like a benediction. Everything. In his world, in his life, in his heart. I love you, I said simply, because there was no point in denying it anymore. I know it's insane and complicated and probably unhealthy, but I love you. Somewhere between the diner and here, between the cage and the garden, I fell completely in love with you. Dante's eyes closed, and when they opened again, they shimmered with something I'd never seen before. Tears, maybe, or just overwhelming emotion. I've loved you since you looked at me like I was just a man who needed coffee, he said quietly. I've loved you through every moment of trying to keep you safe, every night of sitting beside your bed while you slept, every second of this impossible situation. You're my redemption, Sofia, my chance to be something more than the monster my father created. He kissed me again, softer this time, full of promise and forever. So what happens now? I asked when we finally broke apart. Now? A smile curved his lips, genuine, full of warmth. Now I ask you properly. No cages, no imprisonment, no making decisions for you. Just a choice. He took my hands in his, and despite everything he was, everything he'd done, his hands trembled slightly. Stay with me, Sofia. Not because you're trapped, not because you're in danger, but because you want to. Build a life with me. Let me spend every day proving that I can be worthy of the gift you are. I thought about my old life, the diner, the crushing poverty, the slow erasure of self, and I thought about this life. Dangerous, yes, but also full of passion and purpose, and being seen for the first time in years. It wasn't really a choice at all. Yes, I said. Yes, I'll stay. I'll build a life with you. But Dante? I lifted my chin, meeting his eyes with steel in my own. I'm not going to be some delicate thing you keep locked away. If I'm yours, then you're mine too. That means partnership, not protection. Equals, not captive and captor. His smile widened, fierce and proud. I wouldn't have it any other way. 6 months later, I stood in the same garden where everything had almost ended, watching the sun set in shades of amber and rose. The house was full again, but this time with celebration. A gathering of families, of allies, of the strange world I'd become part of. Maria bustled past with trays of food, grinning at me. Dr. Castellano raised a glass in salute from across the lawn. Even Marco smiled, a rare expression that softened his usually stern features. And Dante. Dante stood beside me, one arm around my waist, looking at me like I'd hung the stars. "Happy?" he asked quietly. I thought about everything that had led us here. The collapse, the cage, the war, the fear and the fighting and the impossible journey from waitress to... What? Mafia wife felt too simple. Partner to a dangerous man felt more accurate. "Yes," I said honestly. "Complicated and messy and sometimes terrifying, but yes, happy." He pulled me closer, pressing a kiss to my temple. "I'm going to spend the rest of my life making sure you stay that way. That's a long time. Not nearly long enough." The sun finished its descent, painting the sky in darkness. But standing there in Dante's arms, surrounded by the life we'd built from chaos and violence and impossible odds, I wasn't afraid of the dark anymore. Because I'd learned that sometimes the most dangerous men carried the most gentle hearts. Sometimes cages became sanctuaries. And sometimes love grew, not despite the darkness, but because of it, transforming two broken people into something whole. I'd been a waitress who'd saved a man without meaning to. Now I was a woman who'd chosen to stay, to fight, to love with everything I had. And in Dante's world, our world, that made all the difference.